Why was everyone staring at her like that? The echo of the last gunshot still hung in the California heat, rolling out over the dry hills like distant thunder. Dust shimmered above the range as silence replaced applause. Even the flags at the desert wind shooting range seemed to freeze. 100 shots, 100 perfect hits, every bullet finding its mark with impossible precision. A Marine observer still held his binoculars to his eyes, unwilling to believe what the scoreboards confirmed. The other shooters, men trained for war, stood motionless, their faces caught somewhere between disbelief and reluctant awe. And in the middle of it all, the woman who'd done it lowered the borrowed rifle with calm hands. "Who the hell is she?" someone whispered. Her name was Claire Daniels, 34. No military training, no service record, just a clerk from a hardware store in Lakewood. 12 hours earlier, she'd been stacking boxes and fixing displays. Now she'd done something the Marine Corps' best snipers had failed to do. But to understand that moment, to understand her, you have to go back. 3 months earlier, the California Valley was drowning in heat. It was the kind of afternoon that made breathing feel like work, where every car hood shimmered and the air smelled of baked asphalt. The Jameson Hardware and Supply sign creaked above the corner of Harbor Boulevard and Mariposa Street. The blue awning had faded years ago, but it still held. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the scent of lumber, paint thinner, and motor oil. A symphony of quiet sounds, the clink of metal, the hum of a ceiling fan, the dull scratch of boxes sliding across worn tile. Claire knelt on the floor beside a display of power tools, reorganizing a section a customer had left in chaos. Her movements were steady, efficient, almost meditative. That was her gift, order in small things. She didn't rush. She didn't complain. She just worked because that was all she had left to control. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, her blue polo shirt darkened with sweat near the collar. The embroidered Jameson's Hardware logo was frayed from years of washing. She looked like anyone else, ordinary, invisible. But there was something in her gray eyes, something sharp and quietly restless, like a blade she'd hidden too long. "Excuse me, miss." The voice came from behind her, firm, precise, belonging to someone used to being obeyed. She turned to find 4 Marines in fatigues browsing the fastener aisle. They didn't look around much. Men like that never did. They carried themselves with that peculiar kind of confidence born from discipline and danger. The leader, a young captain with sharp features and a jaw cut from stone, gave her a nod that was more order than greeting. "I need 1/4-inch stainless lag bolts, minimum 3-inch length." Claire stood, brushed off her knees. "Aisle 7, second bay from the back," she said, voice calm and polite. "If you're mounting something heavy, stainless will hold up, but if you're after raw strength, grade 8 hex bolts might be better. They'll handle more shear stress." The captain blinked, a small crease forming between his brows. He wasn't used to being advised. "I think I know what I need," he said coolly. "Of course." Claire led them down the aisle, pulling down boxes with practiced hands. As she worked, she heard them talking behind her, shop talk in clipped tones. Something about mount calibration drift and operator error. Words that caught her attention even if they weren't meant for her. She set the boxes down, but curiosity got the better of her. "If you're losing 0 after transport," she said, "check your isolation grommets. Most people overtorque the bolts and kill the vibration damping. It makes calibration drift worse, not better." The captain turned slowly, expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a dry, mirthless sound. "Thanks for the hardware store wisdom," he said. "I'll let the Marine Corps know." He turned away before she could reply, his boots clicking against tile. One of his men, a corporal with an honest face and nervous energy, glanced back at her. There was curiosity there, respect maybe, but he followed his captain out the door without a word. The doorbell chimed, silence settled again. Claire exhaled, pushing the irritation down. She'd been dismissed before, more times than she could count. She knew the pattern by heart. A woman who knew too much, a man who didn't want to hear it. Walter Jameson appeared from the back office, coffee mug in hand. 60, gray-haired, solid as oak. "Marines giving you trouble again?" he asked, voice gravelly from years of sawdust and caffeine. "Nothing new," Claire said, straightening the shelf. Guy thought taking advice from a hardware clerk was beneath him. Walter grinned. "Then you gave him advice anyway." "Yeah," she smiled faintly. "I always do." He chuckled. "You were right about the grommets, though. I used to build aerospace mounts. People torque the bolts too tight every time, makes everything worse." He walked back behind the register, leaving her with that small, comforting validation. Walter never treated her like she was just help. He'd hired her when no one else would, never asked too many questions about the years she didn't talk about. The rest of the day passed in rhythm: customers, receipts, the smell of sawdust and summer heat. Routine was safety. But around 6 p.m., as she flipped the sign to closed, the door opened again. Pastor George Fleming stepped inside, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Claire," he said breathlessly, "glad I caught you. You got a minute?" "For you, Pastor, always." They spoke in a quiet corner while Walter locked the register. Fleming's voice carried the weight of someone used to helping everyone but himself. "It's the community center," he said. "We've got real trouble." The St. Michael's Community Center wasn't just a building. It was the heart of their small neighborhood. A daycare, a food bank, a safe haven when the world felt cold. Claire had volunteered there once years ago, before life had worn her down. "The roof's collapsing," Fleming said. "HVAC's dying. The foundation's cracked. Inspector says we've got 4 months to fix it or we lose the occupancy permit." Claire's heart sank. How bad? $80,000. She didn't have to say what that number meant. 80,000 might as well have been 8 million. "We're organizing a Veterans Appreciation event next month," Fleming said. "Trying to raise half of it. I know money's tight, but I wanted you to know." Claire nodded, throat tight. "I'll help however I can." "I know you will," he said gently. "You always do." When he left, she stood in the quiet store for a long moment, staring at the door. Walter said nothing, just gave her a look of quiet understanding. Her walk home was slow, her thoughts heavier than her steps. The neighborhood glowed orange in the dying light, children chasing each other through small yards, the hum of televisions behind thin walls. Everything looked ordinary, but every house carried stories of struggle she knew by heart. She reached the small yellow bungalow she shared with her mother. The paint was peeling, the fence leaning, but inside it smelled of basil and garlic. Home. Her mother, Linda, stood at the stove, humming softly. At 62, she moved carefully, her back stiff from old factory injuries. But her smile when she saw her daughter was pure sunlight. "There's my girl," she said. "How was work?" "Fine, busy. How are you feeling today?" "Can't complain." The answer was automatic. She always said it, even on bad days. They cooked together in comfortable silence until Claire broke it. Pastor Fleming came by. "The community center, in real trouble, needs 80,000 for repairs." Linda paused, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the sauce. "Oh no, that place, it's done so much for everyone." "I know." "We'll help," Linda said firmly. "I can bake something for the fundraiser. You can help set up." "Mom," Claire sighed, "we can barely cover rent as it is." Her mother gave her a look that silenced argument. "We'll still help." Dinner was simple: pasta and bread, comfort food for tired souls. Afterward, Claire helped her mother with her medication, watching her struggle to open a bottle. The sight tightened something in her chest. Later, in her small bedroom, Claire sat on her bed staring at the shelf above her desk. 3 relics from another life: a gold medal from the California State Shooting Championship, a yellowed newspaper clipping with her smiling face, local shooter headed to Olympics, and a photograph of her 19-year-old self holding a rifle, sunlight glinting in her eyes. That was before everything fell apart. Before her uncle, then Major Thomas Garrison, covered up the death of a recruit during a training exercise, before she refused to lie about it, before he used his influence to destroy her reputation, her sponsors, her future. He'd moved up in rank, she moved behind a counter. She hadn't fired a rifle since. Claire lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the sounds of her neighborhood blended into a low hum, dogs barking, kids laughing, the faint rumble of cars. Ordinary life. Safe, predictable, empty. She closed her eyes and tried not to remember the stillness before a shot. The weight of a rifle, the whisper of breath between heartbeats, but memory has its own aim, and it never misses. That night, her dreams took her back to the range, targets stretching into infinity, her uncle's shadow standing just beyond the sights, smiling as the world turned against her. When she woke, her pillow was damp, and her hands were clenched as if they still held a rifle. Morning brought no relief, only the gray quiet of routine. She dressed, made breakfast for her mother, walked the same 20 blocks to the hardware store. At 7:30 sharp, the bell over the door jingled again, and 3 Marines entered. Claire recognized them immediately, the corporal from before among them. "Ma'am," he said, almost shy, "you're the one who mentioned isolation grommets yesterday, right?" "That was me. I'm Corporal Kyle Anderson. This is Corporal Douglas. We wanted to ask you something about what you said. That issue we've been having, it's exactly what you described. The calibration drifts after transport. Our captain thinks it's operator error, but you think it's bad mounting," she said, finishing the thought. Anderson's relief was visible. "Exactly." Claire frowned, curious despite herself. "What kind of system?" "Precision optics, high-end rifle scopes with ballistic computers." She nodded slowly, her mind shifting gears into the comfort of engineering logic. If they're mounted on rigid rails and transported over rough terrain, the vibration harmonics could throw off alignment. Overtorquing the screws transfers the shock straight into the optics. That's your drift. Anderson's eyes lit up. "That's what I said." "So what do you want from me?" she asked cautiously. He hesitated. "We were hoping you could demonstrate at the fundraiser next month. Captain Sheridan's team is doing a public exhibition shoot. If you showed up, just as a civilian, and outshot them, he'd have to admit there's a problem." Claire laughed once, humorless. "You think your captain's going to let a random store clerk embarrass him in public?" Anderson smiled. "If he thinks it'll prove how superior Marines are, he'll agree in a heartbeat." She wanted to say no, she almost did, but the words wouldn't come. The community center, $80,000, her mother's medication, the long, bitter silence of 12 wasted years. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to aim again. She stood at the counter long after the Marines had gone, staring at the door they just walked through. The world around her, the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint clatter of tools from the back room, seemed distant, muffled, unreal. Her reflection in the glass display case looked back at her, expression calm but eyes awake. Something had shifted. Walter appeared from his office, coffee mug in hand as usual. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Maybe I did," Claire said softly. 3 Marines, actually." He raised an eyebrow. "They want me to shoot at a fundraiser," she continued, almost disbelieving the words herself. "Some kind of challenge, Marines versus civilian, to raise money for St. Michael's." Walter set the mug down, leaning against the counter. "And you're thinking about it?" "I shouldn't be," she said quickly. "That part of my life is over." "Over?" His tone was gentle, but it carried weight. "Claire, some things don't end. You can ignore them, bury them, but they stay part of you." "I can't go back," she said, shaking her head. "You don't understand what that cost me. He took everything, my name, my reputation, everything I worked for. If I start shooting again, he'll find out. He'll come after me. Walter's gaze softened. Maybe it's time he tried. She looked away. Or maybe it's time I stopped giving him the chance. He didn't press further. Walter knew when silence spoke louder than argument. But that night, as Claire walked home beneath the sinking sun, his words followed her. Maybe it's time he tried. Dinner was quiet. Her mother could sense something was different. Years of shared silence had taught Linda Daniels to read her daughter's face better than any words could. "You've been thinking hard about something," Linda said, not looking up from her plate. Claire hesitated. "The Marines came back to the store. They want me to take part in a shooting demonstration for the fundraiser." Her mother stopped mid-bite. "And you?" "I told them no, but I've been thinking about it." Linda studied her daughter carefully, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You miss it." Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her mother's voice softened. "You were born for it, Claire. You saw the world differently. You saw order in chaos. Every time you shot, I could see it, how you calmed yourself, how the world disappeared until it was just you and that moment." Claire looked down at her hands, still calloused from years of work. "That part of me got someone killed, Mom, or at least that's what they made it look like. And when I tried to tell the truth, they broke me for it." Linda reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own. "He broke your career, not your gift. There's a difference." The words lingered between them like the echo of a gunshot, soft but powerful. 2 days later, Claire stood outside the St. Michael's Community Center, staring at the aging brick walls that held half her childhood. Pastor Fleming met her at the door, his face weary but brightened by hope. "Glad you came. I wanted you to see why this place matters." He led her through the rooms, the peeling paint, the flickering lights, the water-stained ceiling tiles. Yet everywhere she looked, life persisted. Children in the daycare laughed over finger paints. Elderly neighbors played cards in the lounge. A volunteer taught a teenager how to write a resume on one of the old computers. "This place serves 200 people a week," Fleming said quietly. "If we close, they have nowhere else to go." Claire nodded, swallowing hard. "And the fundraiser, how that coming along?" "We've got the Marines from Camp Pendleton doing a demonstration. We're hopping for a crowd. But we need something special, something memorable." She looked around the hall, the laughter, the faces, the small miracles happening in the background of broken walls. Then she said, almost to herself, "What if it was a challenge, Marines versus civilians? Winner gets bragging rights. People could donate to whichever side they want." Fleming blinked, then smiled. Now that could work. She didn't know why she said it. She just knew in that instant that she would do it. That evening, in the privacy of her small room, Claire dug through her closet until she found an old equipment bag shoved into the back corner. The zipper resisted at first, as if even it didn't want to remember. Inside were ghosts. A shooting glove still molded to the shape of her hand, custom earplugs, a logbook filled with neat handwriting and trajectory notes, and at the bottom a faded photograph of a younger version of herself, smiling, certain, unstoppable. For 12 years, she'd buried that girl. She sat on her bed holding the photo, memories hitting her like recoil. The roar of the crowd at the state finals, the metallic scent of the range, the voice of her coach telling her she was Olympic material, and then the voice of her uncle warning her what would happen if she spoke up about the accident. He'd been right about one thing: she had lost everything. But maybe, for once, she could lose something else instead, her fear. The next morning, Claire walked into work with purpose. Corporal Anderson was waiting for her outside, standing awkwardly by the door. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep. Did you think about our proposal?" "I did." He straightened. "And if your captain agrees, I'll do it, but on one condition." Anderson blinked. "What kind of condition?" "It has to be real," Claire said. No easy targets. A full test. 100 consecutive hits, different distances, 200 to 1200 meters. Any miss, you're out. His eyes widened. That's insane. Even our best shooters couldn't. Exactly, she interrupted. That's the point. If your equipment's flawed, it'll show. And if anyone hits all 100, it'll raise more money than you can imagine. Anderson hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll talk to Captain Sheridan. Tell him a hardware store clerk thinks she can outshoot him. That should do it. Anderson's grin returned. He'll take that bet. When he left, Walter appeared from the back, having overheard enough to understand. You're really doing this, aren't you? She smiled faintly, apparently. You know what this means, Claire. Word will get around, your uncle will hear. Let him, she exhaled slowly. I've been hiding long enough. Walter studied her, then said quietly, You sure you're ready for what comes next? No, she admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. He gave a small, proud nod. Then do it right. And as she unlocked the front door, ready for another day of ordinary life that was about to become anything but, Claire felt something stir inside her. Something she hadn't felt in a decade. Not anger, not even pride. Hope. 5 days later, Anderson returned, smiling like a man carrying good news. He took the bet, he said. Captain Sheridan agreed to the challenge. 100 consecutive hits, random distances, identical rifles. He's calling it the Marine Precision Trial. The fundraiser is officially on the calendar, 3 weeks from Saturday. Claire exhaled, half excitement, half fear. 3 weeks. They're advertising it already. Marines versus Community Champion. Admissions $20. Pastor Fleming says it's drawing attention. She nodded, her stomach tightening. Then I guess it's real. It's more than real, Anderson said. Sheridan's already bragging on base that he's going to make you regret it. Claire gave a wry smile. Confidence makes people sloppy. Yeah, well, Anderson grinned. Good luck proving that. When he left, Claire leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. She hadn't held a rifle in 12 years. Muscle memory fades. Focus dulls. Hands forget their own rhythm. What was she thinking? That night she brought the old equipment bag to the kitchen table. Her mother watched silently as Claire laid everything out. Gloves, scope chart, notebook. So it's happening, Linda said. It's happening. Are you scared? Terrified? Her mother smiled softly. Good, means it matters. Claire swallowed. What if I've lost it? What if I get out there and miss everything? Then you'll have tried, Linda said simply. That's more than you've done in 12 years, but I don't think you've lost anything. Some things are too much a part of us to ever disappear. Claire looked at her mother's worn hands, the faint tremor from pain medication, the quiet strength in her eyes, and she wanted to believe her. 2 days later, Walter approached her during a lull in the store. Made a few calls, he said. Desert Wind Range will let you practice in the mornings before they open. No charge. Claire blinked. You serious? Frank Albertson runs the place. He remembers you from the competition circuit. Said it's about time you came back. I can't afford ammo. Already handled. The local business owners pitched in. You've got ammo, range, time, everything. She stared at him, speechless. Why would they do that? Because this town remembers, Walter said. They remember what your uncle did, and they know what you stood for. The words hit her harder than she expected. She spent 12 years believing everyone had forgotten, that her silence had erased her. But maybe it hadn't. The next morning before dawn, Claire drove toward the desert. The sky was a pale gray ribbon over black hills. The world felt empty and endless. The radio played softly, but she didn't really hear it. When she arrived, a familiar figure stood waiting near the gate. Frank Albertson, older, leaner, but unmistakably the same man who'd handed her her first competition trophy 15 years earlier. Thought you might have quit shooting for good, he said, shaking her hand. I did, she replied, but life had other plans. Good, Frank said, about time. He led her to the firing line. Targets stretched into the horizon. The smell of sand, oil, and distance filled the air. He handed her a Remington .308, an old friend in metal form. Nothing fancy, he said, but it'll tell you the truth if you listen. Claire ran her fingers along the rifle's frame, reacquainting herself with the weight, the balance, the quiet authority of it. Her pulse quickened. She loaded a single round, took position, exhaled. And for the first time in 12 years, she pulled the trigger. The recoil was sharp, honest. Downrange, the target bore a neat, clean hole just right of center. Frank peered through his spotting scope. Not bad for someone who's been on the bench a decade. She smiled faintly, breathing unsteady. Feels like I just remembered how to breathe. Frank nodded. Then let's make sure you don't forget again. By noon, she'd worked through 50 rounds. Her shoulder ached, her cheekbone bruised from the rifle's stock, but she was smiling, really smiling for the first time in years. The desert wind carried her laughter away, but inside she felt something return, something steady. Purpose. The wind picked up around noon, dry and restless, swirling dust along the range. The desert had a way of testing patience. It whispered doubts between gusts, turned sweat into salt, and made even the strongest question why they were there. Claire didn't mind. She lived in harder silences. Frank stood beside her under the shade of the range awning, spotting scope tucked against his shoulder. Wind's tricky today, he said. Good, Claire answered, adjusting her bipod. The real thing never waits for calm weather. Her tone was quiet but carried something sharp, discipline reborn. She'd been there every morning for a week now. Sunrise to noon, then work at the hardware store, then home to help her mother. Sleep came late, but not from exhaustion. It was the kind of wakefulness that came with purpose, the feeling of moving again after being still too long. Frank called out the next target distance, 800 meters. She adjusted her scope. The air shimmered with heat. The target blurred, then cleared. Her breathing slowed until the wind seemed to move to her rhythm. The shot cracked through the desert. Metal rang downrange. Dead center, Frank said. She lowered the rifle, exhaled. Next. 950. By the end of the second week, her grouping was tighter than ever. Frank, who'd trained hundreds of shooters, had stopped offering advice after the third day. There wasn't much to teach someone who already knew the language of precision better than most humans could ever speak it. But she wasn't chasing perfection anymore. She was chasing peace. Back at the hardware store, Walter had turned into her quiet accomplice. He handled customers when she was late, covered her shifts when she needed range time. "You're getting too good at this," he said one afternoon as she came in, still dusted with desert sand. "I was always good," she said with a tired smile. "I just forgot for a while." He chuckled, leaning on the counter. "You ever think about why you stopped?" "I didn't stop," she said after a pause. "I ran." Walter's eyes softened. "And now?" "Now I'm tired of running." He nodded slowly. "Then don't hold back." But even as she said it, Claire knew that skill wasn't her real battle anymore. Her hands were steady. Her aim was perfect. What shook her was what waited behind that, the moment the world would remember her name again. At home, her mother noticed the change. "You're sleeping less," Linda said one evening, "and smiling more." "I'm fine, Mom, just focused." Her mother smiled gently. "You used to look like that before every tournament, the same light in your eyes." "Guess it never went out," Claire said softly. They shared dinner quietly. The TV hummed faintly in the background, a news anchor talking about defense spending, new technology, overseas conflicts. The kind of stories that once felt distant but now echoed strangely close. Then Linda said something unexpected. "Your uncle called." Claire froze. "What?" "He left a message on the landline," her mother said carefully. Said he heard about the event, wanted to talk. Claire's hands clenched. He still has people everywhere. Do you want to call him back? No, the answer came instantly. He's not calling to apologize, Mom. He's calling to warn me off. He doesn't want his old lies dragged back into the light. Her mother sighed. He can't hurt you anymore, Claire. Claire looked down. People like him don't need to hurt you directly. They just wait for you to destroy yourself. The silence stretched long after that. Later, as her mother dozed on the couch, Claire stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool, the stars sharp above her. Somewhere out there, her uncle probably sat in some base office, comfortable, respected, untouched by what he'd done. She whispered to the darkness, "You can't hide forever." And for the first time, she didn't feel afraid saying it. A week before the event, the range started to draw attention. Local media showed up. Marines came to watch, curious about the civilian who dared to challenge one of their own. They called her the hardware store sniper. Some meant it as a joke. Others said it with grudging respect. Frank didn't let it distract her. "Ignore them," he said. "Noise is just wind you can't measure." She smiled faintly. "You always did love your metaphors." "I'm old, I earned them." The captain himself, Daniel Sheridan, arrived on the fourth day. He was every inch the Marine she remembered from the store. Sharp haircut, polished boots, perfect posture. But there was something else now, a smirk that came from knowing people were watching. "So this is the legendary clerk," he said, approaching the firing line. Claire stayed prone, one eye in the scope. "Hardware manager, technically." He laughed. "Hope you brought your best game. Wouldn't want the Corps embarrassed by a civilian with a lucky streak." "Luck for people who don't practice," she said, pulling the trigger. The target cracked cleanly at 1,000 meters. Frank chuckled under his breath. "Guess she practices." Sheridan's grin tightened. "We'll see on the big day." He walked away with his entourage, but she caught a flicker in his expression, doubt, faint but real. The following nights were quiet but heavy. Claire would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths. She wasn't nervous about missing. She was nervous about being seen again. The human mind isn't built to live hidden for a decade and then step into the spotlight. Every part of her that had learned to shrink, to avoid attention, to apologize for existing, was fighting the part of her that wanted to stand tall again. But when she thought about the community center, the children, the laughter, her mother's smile, fear began to lose its power. The morning before the fundraiser, Claire drove out early, arriving before even Frank. She wanted one last session alone. The desert was silent, the air still cool, the world washed in soft gold light. She set up her rifle, adjusted her scope, and closed her eyes. She thought of the young woman she used to be, the dreamer who believed honesty mattered, who thought doing the right thing would protect her. The one who learned, the hard way, that truth sometimes costs everything. When she opened her eyes, they were clear. She fired, one round, one hit, then another, and another, until the sun was high and she'd fired 100 rounds, each one a whisper saying, "I'm still here." The day of the event arrived. The town turned out in full, families, veterans, reporters. Flags lined the fences, children waved hand-painted signs. A brass band played off-key military tunes while volunteers sold barbecue plates to raise funds. At the far end of the field, the shooting range was set. 2 identical rifles, 2 sets of targets stretching across the valley. Cameras streamed live. Pastor Fleming stood at the podium. "Today," he said, "we're not here to see who wins. We're here to remember why we fight for what matters: integrity, courage, community." Applause rippled across the crowd. Captain Sheridan approached, smiling like a man on stage. "Ready, Miss Daniels?" "Always," she said quietly. They shook hands, firm, respectful but tense. 2 worlds about to collide. Frank patted her shoulder before stepping back. "Remember," he said softly, "it's not about him. It's about you." She nodded. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The first shot rang out like thunder. Both rifles fired almost simultaneously. Targets shimmered in the sun. Sheridan's grouping was solid, professional, the kind of precision expected from a Marine sniper. Claire was tighter, cleaner. By the 10th target, murmurs spread through the crowd. By the 30th, applause began. By the 50th, Sheridan was sweating. He adjusted, trying to recover. His rhythm faltered. One miss, then another. His frustration showed small mistakes turning into bigger ones. Claire, meanwhile, never rushed. Each shot came with breath measured and calm like a heartbeat, one after another, the sound of quiet defiance. At 80 targets, the range officer called out, "Captain Sheridan, 91 hits, missed 2." The crowd murmured. Sheridan's jaw clenched. Claire's turn came. She exhaled, her face still, her pulse slow. The shot cracked, metal rang, dust rose again and again until the final target dropped. Silence. Frank checked through his scope, then turned, smiling. 100 perfect. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered. Reporters surged forward. Sheridan stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face. Claire lowered the rifle and stepped back. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from release, 12 years of silence dissolving into a single, undeniable truth. She turned toward Sheridan, her voice calm. "Maybe check your mounts." For a moment, even he smiled, half in defeat, half in respect. Pastor Fleming took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for both competitors and for what we've raised today." He read the total from a slip of paper. $78,412. The cheers nearly shook the sky. Claire closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. The weight she'd carried for years lifted, not because she'd won, but because she'd stopped hiding. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the sun dipped low, she walked alone to the empty range. The smell of gunpowder lingered faintly in the air. Frank joined her, standing beside her quietly. "You did it," he said. She smiled. "No, we did it." He nodded. "So what now?" She looked out across the desert, where her last bullet still echoed somewhere far away. "Now I live with it, and maybe sleep for once." As the wind rose again, carrying dust across the field, she thought of her uncle, of lies, of silence, of how power always fears truth. She didn't need to confront him anymore. Her victory already had. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. And that whisper carries farther than anyone expects. The desert slept under a fatting sun, and the echo of applause still lingered in Claire's mind like the hum after thunder. That night, she didn't dream of failure. For the first time in 12 years, she dreamed of silence, the good kind. The kind that comes when your soul finally exhales. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains of her bedroom, brushing against the photograph of her younger self, smiling, fearless, holding her rifle with pride. She looked at that picture as she dressed, and for once it didn't hurt. It didn't mock what she'd lost. It reminded her what she'd found again. Downstairs, her mother was already awake, stirring oatmeal at the stove. "You're famous," Linda said with a grin. "They showed you on TV last night, said you defied all expectations." Claire laughed softly. "Guess I was overdue." "They said the fundraiser almost met its goal," her mother continued. "People are still donating online. The center might actually be saved." Claire smiled, setting 2 bowls on the table. Then it was worth every bruise. But as they sat to eat, the phone rang. An old landline, the kind no one used anymore. Linda reached for it. "Hello." Her face changed almost instantly from warmth to guarded tension. She held the phone toward her daughter. "It's him." Claire froze. The air seemed to thicken. "Tell him I'm not." "He said it's urgent," her mother cut in. Reluctantly, Claire took the phone, pressing it to her ear. "What do you want?" A deep, composed voice answered. I saw the broadcast. You've made quite the comeback. Don't pretend you're proud, she said flatly. I'm not calling for pride. I'm calling for advice, her uncle said, the faintest edge of unease creeping into his tone. You're good at reading wind, at understanding pressure. Maybe you'll understand this. I'm standing in one hell of a storm, and I think you're part of it. Her heart kicked once hard. What are you talking about? I can't explain over the phone. Meet me. Tomorrow, San Diego, Dock 47, noon. I'm not. But the line clicked dead before she finished. She stood there, phone still against her ear, pulse rising. Her mother watched, anxious. What did he say? He wants to meet, says he's in trouble. Linda frowned. Don't go, you know how he manipulates. I know, Claire said quietly, but if he's scared, that's new. The drive to San Diego the next morning felt like traveling back through time. The highway stretched endlessly, the ocean glinting far off to the right. She drove in silence, her thoughts circling like birds over an old battlefield. She arrived early, parking near the docks where military supply ships loaded under the gray coastal sky. The air smelled of salt and oil. Seagulls screamed overhead. She spotted him immediately, Brigadier General Thomas Garrison, in full dress uniform, standing near a bench by the pier, posture rigid as ever. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes were still the same, sharp, calculating. Claire, he said, turning as she approached, still punctual. Still deceitful, she answered. He almost smiled. Some habits die harder than others. Why am I here? She asked. He took a slow breath. Do you know what Project Vantage is? No. You weren't supposed to. It's a classified optics program, multispectral targeting systems, next-gen ballistics AI. We built it from the ground up to make human shooters obsolete. She folded her arms, and it failed, he said quietly. Every unit with the Vantage scope has been reporting drift, random misalignment that can't be explained by vibration or recoil. Just misses that shouldn't happen. Claire's stomach tightened. You think it's the mounts. He looked at her sharply. You already knew. I saw it, she said. The Marines at the hardware store were describing the same problem. That's why I challenged Sheridan. He frowned. You caused quite the stir. The commandant himself asked why a civilian outshot his best team. Maybe because your systems are broken. Garrison's jaw tensed. They're not just broken, they've been tampered with. She blinked. Tampered. He nodded grimly. I think someone's feeding false calibration data into the system. Sabotage. We've had weapon failures in 3 training operations and 1 live deployment, and all the optics share the same signature, the same offset pattern. And you think I can help you? I think you already have, he said. The way you described the grommet issue, the damping torque, that was the missing piece. You spotted in one sentence what a room full of defense engineers missed in 6 months. She stared at him, anger mixing with disbelief. You ruined my life for telling the truth. Now you want my help. He didn't flinch. I didn't come to apologize, Claire. I came to survive. Whoever's doing this isn't after money. They're targeting the entire program. If the failures go public, heads will roll, mine included. She looked away. Good. Careful, he said softly. If the system fails in combat, people die. You think you hate me. Wait until you see your conscience when it's civilians in the crossfire. The words landed hard, not because she forgave him, but because they touched the one thing she couldn't ignore: responsibility. What do you need from me? She asked quietly. He handed her a small data drive. This contains the telemetry logs. Look for anomalies, drift patterns, false wind indexing. If you're right about the mounts, you'll see it. She took the drive reluctantly. If I do this, it's not for you. Of course not, he said. It never was. He turned to leave, then paused. Be careful who you trust. Someone's cleaning house. 2 engineers are already dead. Officially accidents, but I know better. He walked away before she could respond. The gulls screamed again. The waves slapped against the dock. And Claire realized that for the first time since picking up that rifle again, she was scared not of shooting, not of failure, but of what came next. That night she sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, the drive plugged in. The screen filled with rows of data, timestamps, coordinates, sensor readings. At first it was noise. Then patterns emerged. Every third calibration file contained identical deviations, small, precise offsets that wouldn't trigger alarms but would shift aim just enough to cause misses. The kind of error only a shooter would notice. It wasn't mechanical, it was deliberate. She sat back, whispering, "Someone's rewriting the truth." Her mother entered quietly, robe pulled close. "You're still up. Something's wrong with the marine targeting systems. It's not an accident." "Then tell someone." "I don't know who to trust." Linda placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then start by trusting yourself." The next morning, Claire drove to the range to meet Frank. He was adjusting targets when she arrived, coffee in hand. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't. Something going on, Frank. Military optics systems, they're being sabotaged." He frowned. "And how's that your problem?" "Because I might be the only one who can prove it." He studied her for a long moment. "You sure you're ready for that kind of fight again?" "No," she said, "but maybe the fight been waiting for me." He sighed. "Then I guess I'll spot for you one last time." She smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that." By afternoon, she was at the hardware store, poring over ballistic charts and calibration schematics spread across the counter. Walter hovered nearby, confused but supportive. "You're building a case?" he asked. "Trying to," she said. "If I can model the drift pattern, I can trace where the interference started. Like finding a fingerprint in the wind." She smiled. "Exactly." The bell over the door jingled. Two men in plain clothes entered. Their posture screamed military even before they spoke. "Claire Daniels?" one asked. She straightened. "Who's asking?" "Office of Naval Intelligence. We'd like to ask a few questions." Walter's expression darkened. "She's busy." "This isn't optional," the taller man said, flashing a badge. "It's about the data you received from Brigadier General Garrison." Claire's blood ran cold. "You're monitoring him." The man ignored the question. "Come with us, ma'am." Walter stepped forward, protective. "She's not under arrest." The agent's tone softened slightly. "No, sir, but we'd rather talk somewhere private." Claire hesitated, glancing at Walter. He gave a slight nod. "Go," he said quietly, "but be careful." The drive in the black government SUV felt endless. Neither man spoke. The city passed in sterile silence. Finally, they stopped outside a nondescript federal building. Inside, the air was cold, the hallways lined with unmarked doors. They led her into a conference room where a woman in a gray suit waited. Her hair was tied back, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. "Ms. Daniels," she said, "I'm Director Harper, O&I Counterintel. You recently received classified data from General Garrison. We need to know what you've done with it." "I analyzed it," Claire said. "It's been tampered with." "We know," Harper replied, "but we don't know by who. And since you're now in possession of the evidence, that makes you a liability to several people who'd rather you were alive." Claire's stomach turned. "You think I'm in danger?" "I don't think. I know." Harper leaned forward. "The sabotage traces back to a defense subcontractor in Nevada, Blackridge Systems. They've been integrating AI calibration modules into our optics. We believe someone at Blackridge is altering firmware for a foreign client." Claire frowned. "Then why come to me?" "Because you caught what our analysts missed," Harper said. "And because your uncle's name is all over the authorizations." Claire's breath caught. "You think he's involved?" "We think he's being framed," Harper said quietly. "But whoever's behind this is moving fast. 3 days ago, one of our informants vanished. Yesterday, your name appeared on an internal security bulletin." "My name. They know you have the drive." The room fell silent. Harper slid a card across the table. "I can protect you, Ms. Daniels, but I can't protect you if you go home." Claire stared at the card, an address, a phone number, a single word written beneath it: "Trust no one." She stood slowly, her mind spinning. "You said people already died over this." "Yes," Harper's gaze held hers. "Don't make yourself next." That night, back in her car, parked under the shadow of the federal building, Claire stared at the card until the letters blurred. "Trust no one." The words didn't frighten her, they steadied her. Because she'd been living that way for 12 years. She started the engine and drove into the dark, not knowing where she was headed, only that she was done hiding. Some wars are fought with bullets, others are fought with silence. And silence, she realized, can be the loudest weapon of all. The road stretched endlessly before her, twin ribbons of asphalt dissolving into the night. Her headlights carved tunnels through the desert dark. Somewhere far behind, San Diego's glow had vanished into memory. Claire drove with both hands tight on the wheel, the card from Director Harper lying on the passenger seat. The words were burned into her mind: "Trust no one." The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent a decade learning not to trust anyone. Now it was official policy. Her fuel gauge blinked low. She pulled off near a lonely gas station, one of those 24-hour outposts that looked like they'd been forgotten by civilization. The air smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee. As she filled her tank, she scanned the empty highway. A single car passed in the distance, black SUV, tinted windows. Her instincts flared. She finished fueling, paid cash inside, and left quickly. Back on the road, she checked the rearview mirror. The SUV was there, same distance, same speed. Her pulse quickened. She pressed the accelerator. The hum of the engine rose. The SUV kept pace. When she veered onto an unmarked service road, it followed. It wasn't a coincidence. She killed her headlights, taking a sharp turn onto a dirt trail that cut between two ridges. Dust erupted behind her. The SUV overshot, its tires screeching as it tried to follow. Claire slammed the brakes, cutting the engine. She sat in silence, heart pounding, the world around her swallowed in darkness. Only the sound of wind and cooling metal filled the air. The SUV slowed somewhere on the main road, idled for a moment, then moved on. She waited 5 full minutes before breathing again. The desert around her was vast and empty, the stars sharp enough to hurt. She pulled the drive from her pocket, turning it over in her hands. Whatever was on it, people were willing to kill for it. And now she was the only one left holding the truth. By dawn, she reached a small motel near the Nevada border, the kind where no one asked questions and paid in cash. She checked in under a false name and locked the door behind her. Inside, the silence was almost unbearable. She set up her laptop again, plugging in the drive. The files loaded: code strings, diagnostics, encrypted modules. Her eyes blurred from fatigue, but she kept scrolling. Then she saw it. Buried deep in the firmware was an executable labeled Mirror Sync, VTX. The code wasn't just tampering with targeting data, it was transmitting it. Every time a Marine used a Vantage scope, the system sent telemetry packets to an external server hidden under a civilian network. Someone wasn't just sabotaging, they were watching. And whoever they were, they'd been watching for months. Her chest tightened. The implications were staggering. Enemy states would pay billions for that kind of access. Every engagement, every firing solution, all streamed in real time to whoever controlled the backdoor. She copied the code to a secure folder, encrypted it, and wiped the drive clean. Then she opened her phone and hesitated. Director Harper had said to trust no one. But Claire needed someone. She scrolled through her contacts until she reached one name she hadn't called in years: Eli Turner. Former Army tech specialist, once her closest friend, before everything fell apart. She stared at the name for a long time, then hit call. It rang twice before his voice answered, wary but familiar. Claire. Hey Eli, it's been a while. Yeah, he said slowly. A decade qualifies, you all right? Not exactly, I need your help. A pause, then, you in trouble. I think we both are. He sighed, same old Claire. 2 hours later, Eli met her at a diner off Interstate 15. An old aluminum box with peeling neon lights and coffee strong enough to strip paint. He looked older, beard flecked with gray, eyes a little harder. But when he saw her, he smiled the same tired, genuine smile she remembered. I figured you'd resurface someday, he said, sliding into the booth. Didn't think it'd involve national security. Guess I like to make an entrance, she said quietly, sliding her laptop toward him. He studied the code as she explained the sabotage, the false drift, the hidden transmissions. His brow furrowed deeper with every line. Whoever wrote this knew exactly what they were doing, he murmured. This isn't amateur work. They buried the relay under weather satellite data. Clever, invisible. Can you trace it? He typed fast, his fingers a blur. The laptop hummed. After a minute, he cursed under his breath. It's bouncing through 12 proxy servers across 3 continents. But the origin, he paused, eyes widening. It's domestic. Blackridge Systems, Henderson, Nevada. That's where Harper said it started. He looked at her. Then they're not covering their tracks. They're daring someone to come. She leaned back, exhaling. They'll expect O&I. They won't expect me. He frowned. Claire, this isn't a shooting competition. These people kill to stay invisible. I know, she said quietly, but they're already following me. The only way to stop this is to expose it. Eli hesitated, then nodded slowly. Then you're not going alone. She almost smiled. Didn't think you'd let me. He grinned faintly. I've missed your bad ideas. That night they drove north in his old pickup, a battered green Ford with 2 bullet holes in the tailgate from a misunderstanding in Kabul, as he put it. The desert unfolded around them, vast and endless. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the silence of people who'd seen too much, lost too much, and still kept moving. You ever think about the old days? He asked suddenly. Every day I try not to, she replied. He nodded, same. After a while, she said quietly, you were the only one who believed me, when Garrison's cover-up started. You were telling the truth, he said simply. Didn't need more than that. Still cost you your career. He shrugged. Wasn't much of a career if it couldn't survive honesty. She smiled faintly. You haven't changed. Sure I have, he said, eyes on the road. Just slower, balder, and more tired. She laughed softly. For a brief, fragile moment, the weight lifted. But it didn't last. They reached Henderson by dawn. The Blackridge facility sat at the edge of an industrial park, white concrete walls, barbed fences, and the hum of generators. Security cameras lined the perimeter. They parked a mile away, using binoculars to study the layout. Looks quiet, Eli said. That's what worries me. Claire adjusted the focus, scanning the entry gate. 2 guards, no insignia. Private contractors, not military. Their rifles weren't standard issue either. She exhaled slowly. We need proof, not confrontation. We get in, copy their server logs, and get out. Eli gave a lopsided grin, just like old times. They waited until nightfall. The desert cooled quickly, shadows stretching long across the sand. They moved quietly along the fence line, cutting through a service gate near the water tower. Eli handled the security bypass, still quick, still precise. Inside, the facility was eerily silent. Rows of servers blinked in low light. Claire's heartbeat slowed to that old rhythm again, the rhythm of patience and precision. She moved like she was back on the firing line, steady and deliberate. They reached the data core room. Eli plugged into a terminal. "Copying logs now," he whispered. "We've got about 3 minutes before the system flags access." She scanned the hall, rifle slung across her shoulder. Her instincts prickled. Something wasn't right. Then faint footsteps. 2, maybe 3 people coming closer. "Eli," she hissed. He nodded, typing faster. "Almost there." The door handle turned. Claire ducked behind a crate, motioning for silence. 3 men entered, black uniforms, no patches, suppressed weapons in hand. Not security, cleanup crew. They moved methodically, searching the rows. Eli finished the transfer, ejecting the drive. "Got it," he mouthed. One of the men turned, eyes catching movement. "Hey." Claire moved before he could finish. One hard strike with the butt of her rifle dropped him. The second spun, firing. The shot tore into a server rack, sparks flying. Eli tackled the third man, grappling in silence until Claire joined in, knocking him out cold. The first one groaned. She leveled her rifle. "Who sent you?" He spat blood, smirking. "You think you're the first to come snooping here. They'll find you before you make it out of Nevada." She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a keycard from his pocket and motioned to Eli. "Move." They sprinted through the corridors as alarms began to blare. Red lights flooded the hallways. Outside, the wind howled and spotlights swept the yard. They climbed the perimeter fence just as shouts echoed behind them. Bullets cracked past, kicking up dirt. They hit the ground running, diving into the truck. Eli floored the engine, gravel spitting from the tires as they sped into the night. After several miles, they slowed, both breathing hard, hearts pounding. Eli glanced at her. "You all right?" She nodded, voice steady. "We got it." He exhaled. "Then we better make it count." Hours later, in a motel off Route 93, they finally stopped. The adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion and silence. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, transferring the new data. "This is big, Claire. This isn't just sabotage, it's espionage. Blackridge has been selling targeting data to at least 3 clients, one of them foreign. Every Marine unit using those optics has been compromised." She leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. "And Harper?" Eli shook his head. "We can't reach her. Every ONI contact line's dark." She stared at the flickering motel light. "Then it's already started." He looked up. "What has?" "The cleanup, the erasure, everything connected to the truth. They'll burn it." Eli rubbed his face. "Then what do we do?" Claire's voice was quiet but firm. "We do what they don't expect." He raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" She met his eyes. "We tell everyone." By dawn, a plan had formed, reckless, dangerous, but simple. They upload the data to public military channels, leak it to every journalist with a clearance badge, and force it into daylight before anyone could bury it. Claire's pulse steadied as she watched the sun rise over the horizon. For years, she'd been punished for telling the truth. Now, she was about to make sure truth had nowhere left to hide. Sometimes, courage isn't about pulling a trigger. It's about refusing to stay silent. The sun rose like fire across the Nevada desert, casting long shadows over the worn-out motel. The air inside smelled faintly of burnt coffee, dust, and adrenaline. Claire sat by the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every noise outside, the whine of a passing truck, the flutter of wind against the curtains, made her pulse jump. Eli sat at the table, laptop open, the blue glow painting his tired face. He'd been typing for hours, eyes red from the screen's glare. "How much longer?" she asked quietly. "Almost there," he said. "I'm building a ghost upload. Once it triggers, the files will replicate across multiple networks. Even if they shut one down, a dozen others will copy it. Claire nodded slowly. So once we start, there's no turning back. He stopped typing, looked at her. You sure you want this? Once that data hits the public net, it's not just the truth that comes out. Your name will too. She gave a faint smile. I've spent 12 years erased, Eli. Maybe it's time people remember who I am. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. I can't protect you after this. I'm not asking you to. Her voice was calm, but underneath it, fear simmered. Not fear of death, but of being seen again, fully, publicly, undeniably. She rose, packing to the door, listening to the wind outside. Somewhere in that wind, she imagined she could hear the past, the lies, the silence, the betrayal. It was all still out there, waiting to be confronted. Eli, she said softly, do it. He hesitated for one last moment, then hit enter. The laptop beeped, the progress bar moving in slow, deliberate increments. Uploading, he said. 20 seconds to full mirror broadcast. Then suddenly his screen glitched. A red window appeared. Remote intrusion detected. Eli's eyes widened. They're tracing it. Hell. They're inside the network. Someone's intercepting the upload in real time. The motel lights flickered. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot outside. Claire's heart froze. They found us. The first shot shattered the front window. Eli dove for the floor, grabbing the laptop. Claire yanked him behind the bed as glass rained down. The laptop screen flashed, progress bar at 83%. Keep it going, she shouted. I'm trying, he typed frantically, redirecting the signal through proxy servers. A voice outside shouted, Daniels, step out and you live. Claire peeked through the broken blinds. 3 men, tactical gear, suppressed rifles. Government issue too clean for mercenaries, too quiet for police. Not O&I, she murmured. They're black ops. Harper's people, Eli asked. She shook her head. No, Blackridge cleanup. She grabbed her sidearm, checked the chamber. We need 10 more seconds. He nodded, 9. She crouched low, aiming toward the doorway. The room was thick with dust, sunlight cutting through in sharp beams. 5 seconds, Eli yelled. Claire waited, counted her breath, then fired once through the door. A man grunted, collapsing. The others hesitated. 3. She turned to Eli, now. Done, he hit the final key. The screen went white, then dark. It's out, everywhere. Claire exhaled. Then we've done what we came for. She threw open the bathroom window. Go. They climbed out into the alley, sprinting behind the motel as engines roared to life. Bullets sparked off the brick wall behind them. Eli stumbled, catching his balance as they dove behind a dumpster. Truck gone, he shouted. Then we run. They took off toward the desert, cutting between storage lots and power poles, the ground hard and unforgiving beneath their boots. The shouts grew distant, the gunfire fading into the wind. After half a mile, they collapsed behind a rocky ridge, lungs burning. Eli leaned against a boulder, breathing hard. Remind me, why do I keep helping you? Because you like bad coffee, she said between breaths. He laughed even as his voice shook. God, I missed this. But beneath the adrenaline, Claire's mind was racing. If Blackridge had found them that fast, it meant one thing. Someone inside O&I had tipped them off. Harper's warning came back to her, trust no one. Hours later, they reached a small desert town called Piach, a ghost of a place with one diner, one gas station, and a motel that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1970s. They checked into a room under fake names. Eli set up a new laptop, one he'd stashed for emergencies, and connected through a satellite uplink. Every news outlet's got it, he said. CNN, Reuters, even the Defense Network. They're calling it the Blackridge leak. Claire leaned over his shoulder, reading the headlines. U.S. military optics program compromised. Data sold internationally. Whistleblower identified. Civilian expert behind leak. Her throat tightened. They named me. Did you expect anything less? He said softly. You embarrassed half the Pentagon on live TV once. They remember. She sat on the edge of the bed, the weight settling in. They'll come for me now. Yeah, he said, but you gave the truth a voice. You did what they couldn't silence. She looked up at him, eyes wet but steady. Then it's worth it. That night while Eli slept, Claire stood outside under the desert stars. The air was cool, the silence deep. She thought of her mother, how worried she must be, how every ring of the phone would now carry fear. She thought of Walter, of Frank, of Pastor Fleming, of everyone who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. And she thought of her uncle. He hadn't called again since that meeting, but now that the data was public, his name would be on every headline too. She wondered what he'd do, fight, deny, or finally admit the truth. A sound behind her made her turn. A car had pulled up down the street. A man stepped out, moving slowly, his silhouette familiar even in the dim light. Her voice caught, Uncle Thomas. He raised his hands empty. You're hard to find, Claire. You should have stayed lost, she said coldly. He stepped closer. You think I didn't know what you'd do? You were always going to publish it. I told Harper you wouldn't stop. You told Harper. He nodded. She was never O&I. Blackridge hired her years ago. The trust no one line, that was real, because she was cleaning up anyone who got too close. The 2 engineers who died, they were the first warnings. Claire's stomach dropped. You used me. I used your anger, he said quietly. But not against you, against them. The program's been bleeding corruption for years, and I couldn't stop it from the inside. You could. You were the only one they underestimated. She stared at him, torn between fury and disbelief. You destroyed my life. I saved your conscience, he said. If I hadn't buried the truth back then, they'd have killed you too. She shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. That's not saving, that's cowardice. He stepped closer, voice low. Maybe, but now we're both paying for it. A second car appeared behind him, black, identical to the ones from before. Thomas turned, realizing too late. Run, he said. The gunfire started before he finished the word. Claire dove behind a parked car as bullets shattered windows. Her uncle went down instantly, hit twice. She fired back once, hitting one of the shooters before rolling for cover. Eli burst from the motel, returning fire. Go. They dragged Thomas behind the car, his blood spreading fast. He grabbed Claire's hand, his voice rasping. The rest, it's in the backup server, hidden under my clearance code. Tell them I tried. His eyes went still. For a long second, everything went silent again, the kind of silence that felt like judgment. Claire knelt beside him, breath shaking, staring at the man who'd ruined her and then, somehow, died trying to redeem it. Eli touched her shoulder. We have to move. She stood, wiping her face, anger replacing grief. Then we finish this. They drove through the night, headlights slicing through dust. The backup server her uncle mentioned had to be at his command post, Marine Systems Command, Camp Hensley, just outside Barstow. Eli looked over. We're walking into a hornet's nest. I know, she said, but it's where the last piece of the truth lives. He nodded, eyes narrowing. Then we go quiet, one shot at a time. By the time they reached the outskirts of Barstow, dawn was breaking again, orange light spilling over the desert hills. They parked near a service tunnel leading into the facility's outer perimeter. Once we're in, Claire whispered, you find the server, I'll keep watch. Eli gave her a look that said what words didn't need to. Then they slipped into the tunnel. The base was half asleep, early shift guards, maintenance crews, the smell of diesel and metal. They moved like shadows through the access corridors, every step measured. Finally, they reached the server room. Rows of blinking machines hummed softly. There, Eli whispered, main terminal. He started typing, pulling the clearance log. Got it. Garrison's backup file. It's encrypted 4 layers deep. Claire's pulse quickened. Can you break it? Maybe, but I'll need time. He started the decryption. The hum of the servers filled the air. For a moment, Claire allowed herself to breathe. Then the lights flickered. Alarms began to wail. They know we're here, Eli shouted. Claire raised her rifle, scanning the corridor. Finish it. Footsteps echoed closer. Shadows moved. Eli's screen beeped. Done, files decrypted. He slammed the data onto a portable drive, tossing it to her. Go. She caught it just as the first soldier appeared at the door. Her shot was clean, silent, decisive. They ran. Through corridors, past alarms, into daylight again. Every sound amplified, every breath a countdown. Bullets chased them across the yard. Eli stumbled, hit in the shoulder, but kept moving. They reached the fence, one last sprint. She turned back, covered him as he climbed. Her own leg burned as a bullet grazed it, but she didn't stop. They fell on the other side, gasping. Sirens blared behind them. Eli looked up at her, pain etched across his face. Tell me it was worth it. She held the drive tight in her fist, staring at the rising sun. It will be. And as they limped toward the horizon, leaving behind the smoke and the shouts and the ghosts of everything she'd lost, Claire finally felt something like peace. Not because the war was over, but because she was no longer running from it. The desert stretched behind them like a wound that would never close. The air was still thick with the taste of gunpowder, and the sun had only just cleared the horizon when Claire pulled the truck over into the shadow of an abandoned mining yard. Eli sat beside her, pale and trembling. His right sleeve was soaked crimson, his jaw clenched to keep the pain silent. She tore through the glove compartment, found a first aid kit, and went to work. Hold still. He winced as she pressed gauze to the bullet wound. I liked it better when you just made coffee. You always said you missed the excitement. I lied. Despite everything, she smiled faintly. You'll live. Yeah, well, he murmured, that's still up for debate. She wrapped his arm tightly, checking the bleeding. You're lucky it passed through clean. You'll hate me later for how tight this is. He gave a pained grin. I already hate you. She sat back against the truck door, exhaling. For a moment, the world went quiet again. Only the desert wind moved, sweeping over the sand and through the open windows like a whisper. Eli stared at her. You're not done, are you? Claire shook her head slowly. Not until it's out there, the full truth. The rest of that data on this drive, it's proof they didn't just sell information. They used it. He frowned. Used it how? She looked out at the horizon, voice low. Combat targeting failures, friendly fire. The system drift wasn't random, it was testing. They needed live data to refine the algorithm before selling it overseas. Eli's face darkened. You're saying those Marine deaths, the ones blamed on operator error, were deliberate, she finished. The silence after that was heavy. Eli stared down at the floorboard. And your uncle knew. He tried to stop it, she said. Too late. He nodded slowly. Then let's make sure he didn't die for nothing. They drove north, avoiding highways, keeping to old service roads. Every passing car made Claire's heart skip. The world felt sharper now, every shadow a possible threat, every glint of light a scope. By the time they reached Reno, the sky was turning silver with rain. They found shelter in a vacant cabin just off a forest trail, half-collapsed roof, walls that smelled of pine and dust, but it was quiet. Claire spread out their gear on an old table, setting the data drive beside her sidearm. We need a secure uplink, she said. Somewhere they can't shut it down. Eli nodded. There's one left, Signal Ridge. Used to be a weather monitoring relay. Still runs autonomous satellite uplink. I can piggyback the data through it. Where? 60 miles north. Then that's where we go. He leaned back, staring at her. You know, you could have just stayed a hardware clerk. Quiet life, small paycheck, no one shooting at you. She smiled softly. I tried, but quiet doesn't mean peace. Night fell hard. The storm rolled in heavy, drumming rain against the roof. Claire couldn't sleep. She sat near the window, watching lightning flash over the dark ridgeline. Memories came uninvited. The smell of the Olympic training camp, the echo of her uncle's voice warning her to know her place. The moment the dream shattered. And then her mother's face when she'd told her the truth all those years ago, whispering through tears, "They can take your name, Claire, but not your soul." Her soul still hurt, but it was alive. She turned as Eli stirred from sleep. "Can't rest?" he asked. She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him." "Your uncle." She nodded. He wasn't a good man, but he wasn't evil either, just broken like the rest of us. Eli studied her for a moment. "You still feel responsible for him." "Not for him," she said quietly, "for what he didn't finish." Thunder rolled. She looked down at her hands, hands that had once built, aimed, fixed, carried, destroyed. Hands that had spent too long being idle. Eli said softly, "You know I never believed in redemption, but you make it look real." Claire smiled faintly. "Redemption isn't something you find. It's something you earn, one choice at a time." Outside, the wind howled. Somewhere, a branch snapped like a gunshot. Both of them froze. A second later, headlights swept across the cabin wall. "Get down," Claire hissed. They hit the floor as tires crunched on gravel. The hum of engines, 2 vehicles, maybe 3. Eli whispered, "They found us again." Claire crawled to the table, grabbed the data drive and her rifle. "Basement." He nodded toward the trapdoor behind the stove. "Old storm cellar." They slipped below just as the cabin door burst open. Heavy boots thundered inside. Flashlights swept the walls. Through the cracks in the floorboards, Claire could see shadows moving, armed men scanning the room. "Search everything," a voice ordered. "She's here." Eli held his breath. Claire's heart hammered so loud she swore they'd hear it. Minutes stretched into lifetimes. Then footsteps above them, directly overhead. One of the men kicked the floorboards. Dust rained down. "Nothing here," he called. The leader grunted. "Check outside, she won't get far." Engines roared again. The sound faded into the distance. Claire waited 5 minutes before moving. When she finally pushed the trapdoor open, her hands were shaking. Eli climbed out after her. "That's twice we've been lucky." She looked at him. "Luck runs out, we move now." By dawn, they were climbing the narrow mountain road towards Signal Ridge. The storm had passed, leaving mist coiling through the trees like smoke. The facility appeared just after sunrise, a lonely tower of steel and satellite dishes, half swallowed by forest. The place looked dead, but the faint hum of power lines said otherwise. Inside, the control room smelled of ozone and rust. Screens flickered faintly, untouched for years. Eli powered up the console, plugging in the drive. "Signal's weak, but I can amplify it. Give me 5 minutes." Claire took position by the doorway, rifle ready. Her legs still burned from the graze, but she ignored it. The forest outside was too quiet. Eli typed fast. "Transmitting encrypted packet through orbital link. It's bouncing off civilian satellites. No one can stop it once it leaves." She watched the progress bar crawl upward, 50%, 60. Then she heard it, the low thump of rotor blades. "Helicopter." She turned, scanning the tree line. "Eli Company." He didn't look up. "How bad?" "Military bad." He swore under his breath. Another 90 seconds. The helicopter swept into view, matte black, no insignia. Ropes dropped, figures descending in formation. Claire braced her rifle on the window ledge. She didn't aim to kill, just delay. She fired a warning shot that shattered a nearby tree trunk. The soldiers scattered for cover. Eli shouted, 75%. Faster. He kept typing, jaw clenched, as gunfire ripped through the walls. Bullets tore through monitors, sparks flying. Claire ducked, returned fire precise and disciplined. She moved from window to window, forcing them to stay pinned. 87, Eli yelled. Come on, come on. Another burst of bullets shattered the console beside him. Smoke poured from the circuitry. He cursed, system dying. Can you reroute? He hesitated only a second, then yanked the drive, slamming it into his laptop. Manual upload. She covered him, breath ragged. Every round echoed like thunder. The helicopter repositioned overhead, its rotors thundering. A spotlight cut through the mist, blinding bright. Eli. 98. He hit enter. The laptop beeped, signal transmitted. It's out, he shouted. Relief hit her like a wave. Then came the second sound, metal ripping apart. The helicopter fired. The explosion threw her backward. The air filled with dust and heat. For a second there was nothing but ringing silence. When she came to, smoke choked the room. The control panels were gone. The tower above them was half collapsed. She crawled through debris. Eli. He was lying near the console, bleeding, laptop still clutched in his hand. She grabbed him, shaking. Hey, stay with me. He smiled faintly, eyes unfocused. Did we? It's done, she whispered. It's all out. Good, his breath hitched. Then worth it. No, don't you dare. He coughed once, then went still. The wind outside carried away the last smoke. The helicopter was gone, the soldiers retreating now that the data was beyond their reach. Claire sat beside him for a long time, her face streaked with ash and tears. She'd lost too many people to silence, and now the truth, loud, undeniable, unstoppable, was all she had left to give meaning to their loss. By noon she walked down the mountain alone, rifle slung across her back, limping slightly. The sky was clear now, impossibly blue. Somewhere satellites were relaying her story, newsrooms were scrambling, leaders were panicking. The truth was out, and nothing could put it back in the box. At the base of the ridge she stopped beside a small stream. The water ran cold and clear. She knelt, washed the blood from her hands, and looked at her reflection. For the first time, she didn't see the woman who'd been ruined by lies. She saw the one who had faced them. And survived. Sometimes silence isn't peace. It's just the space where courage learns to breathe. The sun was setting when Claire reached the edge of the valley. The last light stretched over the Nevada hills, turning everything gold, the dust, the wind, even the old truck she'd borrowed from a stranger on the roadside. The road ahead was long, empty, and silent. She drove without music, without words. Only the hum of the engine and the pulse in her chest kept her company. She didn't know where she was going. There was no mission now, no orders, no allies left to wait for. But for the first time in her life, she didn't need a map. The truth was out. Every broadcast channel was carrying it. The world finally knew about Blackridge, about the sabotage, the data leaks, the deaths swept under the carpet. They knew about the woman who had risked everything to expose it, too. Claire Daniels, former sharpshooter, exiled truth-teller, the hardware store sniper. A name the world had forgotten, suddenly burning through headlines again. She turned the radio on for the first time in days. Static, then a reporter's voice, sharp and alive. The Department of Defense has confirmed the arrest of multiple Blackridge Systems executives. Anonymous sources within ONI suggest a whistleblower triggered the investigation after uncovering years of falsified targeting reports linked to civilian casualties. She turned the volume up. The whistleblower, identified as Claire Daniels of Lakewood, California, is believed to be in hiding after exposing the data leak. Official statements call her actions both criminal and courageous, while public sentiment has turned overwhelmingly in her favor. Claire smiled faintly. Criminal and courageous, she whispered. Guess that's accurate. The reporter continued. In related news, Brigadier General Thomas Garrison was posthumously cleared of wrongdoing. Classified correspondence revealed he attempted to expose the corruption internally before his death. His final message to Daniels remains under review. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. So he had told them the truth in the end. And maybe that was enough. By midnight, she crossed the California border. The road signs grew familiar: San Bernardino, then Lakewood. Home. She parked a few streets away from her old house, sitting in the dark for several minutes before she stepped out. The porch light was on, faint and flickering. The same creak in the fence she'd fixed 100 times still waited to greet her. Inside, her mother was awake. The old lamp glowed beside her chair, a book open but unread. When she looked up and saw Claire standing in the doorway, she didn't speak at first. Then she simply whispered, "You came back." Claire's throat closed. "I had to." Her mother rose slowly, crossing the room, and pulled her into an embrace. For a long moment, they didn't move. When they finally sat down, the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like space finally allowed to breathe. "I saw you on TV," Linda said quietly. "They said you saved lives, that you told the truth." Claire looked down, hands folded. "I didn't save anyone. Eli did most of it, and Uncle Thomas, he paid for it." Her mother shook her head. "You gave them justice. That's saving people too." Claire hesitated. "They'll come after me eventually. Maybe not now, but—" "Then we'll be ready," her mother said, simple as sunlight. "I've spent too long being afraid for you, Claire. I'd rather live proud of you instead." That broke her, quietly, completely. She leaned into her mother's shoulder and let the tears come, for Eli, for Thomas, for every life lost in silence. For the part of herself that had been buried so long, she almost forgot it could still feel warmth. The following weeks passed in fragments. Reporters left notes at the door. Neighbors dropped off flowers. Veterans she'd never met mailed handwritten letters, some shaky, some poetic, all grateful. She didn't respond to most. She wasn't sure what to say to strangers who called her brave when, most nights, she still woke from dreams of gunfire and smoke. But sometimes she'd walk past the community center, now freshly painted, the roof rebuilt, the playground repaired. Kids laughed there again. That was enough of an answer. Pastor Fleming found her one morning, leaning against the new fence watching a group of children draw chalk outlines on the pavement. "They wanted to name the new gym after you," he said, smiling gently. "Claire Daniels Hall." She laughed softly. "Please don't." "Why not?" "Because I didn't do this alone." She nodded toward the laughter, the volunteers, the ordinary people who had refused to give up. "That's who this belongs to." He studied her, eyes kind. "You know, you could speak at the opening ceremony. People would listen." She shook her head. "I've said enough. Sometimes the truth doesn't need another speech. It just needs to live." He nodded slowly. "You're right, but I'll save you a seat anyway." A month later, she got a letter. Official seal, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with the O&I emblem, faintly watermarked in the corner. It read, "Ms. Daniels, your evidence was critical in dismantling the Blackridge network. Although your methods violated multiple security statutes, your actions are recognized as having prevented significant further loss of life. The department does not condone your means but acknowledges your intent. The record will show your service as extrajudicial assistance to national security. Consider this both warning and thanks. D. Harper." Claire stared at the signature. The same woman who had lied, who had tried to control her, who had turned out to be part of the rot, now writing to close the loop. No apology. Just acknowledgement. She folded the letter neatly, set it on the table, and walked outside. The evening was quiet. The air smelled of rain on warm asphalt. Across the street, someone's sprinkler hissed. It was almost peaceful. She sat on the porch steps, watching the last of the daylight fade. Her mind wandered back to the range, to the heat, the dust, the echo of the rifle, the moment everything had changed. She could still feel the weight of that borrowed rifle in her hands, the same precision, the same stillness, but this time the target wasn't paper, it was the past. And she'd hit it dead center. One morning, months later, she returned to the desert. Not for revenge, not for duty, just to remember. The old range had changed. The Marines had repainted the stands, replaced the targets, built a small memorial for fallen marksmen. A plaque stood near the edge, in honor of those who see farther and act when others hesitate. She stood there a long time, fingers tracing the engraved metal. A young recruit nearby recognized her. His face lit up. "Ma'am, are you Claire Daniels?" She almost said no, old habit, but then she caught herself and smiled softly. "Yeah, I was." He grinned awkwardly. "We watched your challenge video in sniper school. It's kind of legendary. They said you hit all 100 without flinching." She laughed quietly. "That part's true, the rest is just wind." He looked nervous. "Could you maybe give me a tip on long-range corrections?" Claire studied him for a moment, remembering the fire in her own eyes once upon a time. Then she took his rifle, checked his scope, adjusted the elevation half a degree. "You're overcompensating, trust your breath. Let it steady the shot, not the other way around." He nodded, awed. "Thank you, ma'am." She handed it back. "Don't thank me, just do it better." As he walked away, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, not victory, not pride, just quiet belonging. She wasn't the exile anymore. She was the lesson. That night back home, she found an old box on her shelf, the one she'd once hidden everything inside: medals, photos, newspaper clippings. She opened it slowly. The memories didn't hurt now. They felt lighter, almost gentle. She took out one photo, her and her uncle at the base range, years before everything went wrong. He was smiling, proud. She was laughing. For a moment, the world back then had seemed so simple. She placed the photo in a frame and set it by the window. Then she wrote something on a piece of paper and slid it beneath. For the ones who told the truth, and for the ones who finally heard it. She sat for a while, just breathing, letting the stillness settle. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again. Kids rode their bikes, porch lights flickered, the world kept turning. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind, to the faint hum of distant traffic, to the sound of life continuing. And somewhere deep inside, the voice that had once been silenced, the one that had waited through all the years of fear and guilt, finally spoke, not out loud but clear as thought. "You did it." Later, as she stood on her porch one last time that night, she whispered to the dark sky, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak." She paused, her reflection faint in the glass door behind her. "It simply acts." The wind carried the words away. And for the first time in her life, she let them go too. The desert didn't sleep that night. Every gust of wind carried the sound of engines somewhere far off. Every echo from the rocks made Claire's nerves sharpen. They had escaped Barstow, but she knew it wasn't over. Nothing that deep ever ended clean. Eli sat in the passenger seat, his shoulder bandaged, pale but awake. He had a quiet look in his eyes, half relief, half realization. The kind people wear when they finally understand that surviving doesn't mean being safe. "Signal Ridge," he said after a long silence. "That's where the backup leads." Claire nodded. "You sure?" "It's what your uncle's clearance pointed to. An isolated uplink tower north of Reno. Abandoned years ago, but the data lines still exist. It's the only place the military forgot to bury." She gave a faint smile. "Then that's where we dig." The truck rumbled through the wasteland, headlights carving through the dark. For hours they said nothing. There was a strange peace in the motion, the hum of tires, the hum of survival. Claire's mind kept drifting back to her uncle's last words, the way he'd said I tried. She wanted to believe him, but believing didn't erase the blood. By dawn, they stopped at a truck stop miles from civilization. The neon sign buzzed weakly, the diner beside it half boarded up. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and grease mixed with the first heat of morning. Claire poured 2 cups and slid one across to Eli. He took a slow sip. Do you ever stop? Stop what? Carrying all of it. She met his eyes. You can't drop what's welded to you. He leaned back, watching her. You know, I used to think whistleblowers were all idealists, heroes. Turns out they're just people who got tired of lying to themselves. Claire smiled faintly. Yeah, heroes are overrated. Most of us just ran out of excuses. They drank in silence after that. Outside, the horizon shimmered in the distance, like heat, like ghosts. They reached Signal Ridge that night. The tower rose from the mountain like a forgotten skeleton of steel and dish arrays, half rusted, half lost to ivy. The air smelled of rain and metal. Eli parked near the base, scanning for movement. Power grid still faintly active, solar recharge array. Claire climbed out, slinging her rifle. You think anyone watching? He shook his head. Maybe, but if they are, they're patient. They entered through a broken service door. The hallways inside were lined with old control consoles, cracked screens, dust thick enough to muffle their steps. The hum of electronics was faint but real. Eli set up his terminal on a half-broken desk. Once I patch into the uplink, I can broadcast the data packet directly to civilian satellites. They'll copy it automatically across independent networks. And then, he gave her a tired grin. Then they'll need 1,000 hands to bury it again, and even then they'll fail. Claire nodded. Do it. He started typing. The screen lit up with cascading lines of code. She stood guard by the window, scanning the trees outside. It was quiet, too quiet. Eli, she said softly, how much time do we have? He glanced up. 10 minutes for full sync. Make it 8. The upload reached 30% when the first tremor hit. A vibration deep in the structure, like a heartbeat that didn't belong. Claire's instincts flared. She turned toward the sound. We're not alone. Eli froze. Drones. She shook her head. Footsteps human. Through the window, dark shapes moved along the tree line, fast, coordinated. Her rifle came up. We've been tracked. Eli cursed. They must have traced the Barstow relay. I'll reroute through a ghost IP. Forget rerouting. Finish the upload. The first flash came from the woods, a muzzle flare, sharp and clean. The bullet shattered the window beside her. Claire hit the floor. They're shooting to disable, not kill. Eli ducked under the console. That means they want the data back. Exactly, so they don't get it. She fired 2 shots through the window, short bursts that sent one shadow collapsing into the brush. The others scattered. Eli's screen blinked. 70%. The air filled with smoke and the smell of burning dust. The tower lights flickered as another explosion rocked the outer wall. They're breaching. Almost done. Claire reloaded, her heartbeat steady now. The chaos around her sharpened her focus until every sound, every echo, every breath felt measured. 90%. She took aim through the haze. A figure appeared at the door, tactical gear, helmet, suppressed weapon. Her shot hit him square in the chest. He dropped before he could fire. Eli. 1 more second. Then beep, the screen flashed, transmission complete. He exhaled shakily. It's done. Before either could move, the upper level gave a deep groan. The structure was collapsing. Go, Claire shouted. They sprinted down the stairwell as the tower's frame twisted above them, metal screaming against wind. Dust choked the hallways. Outside, the rotor wash of a helicopter slammed against the ground. Black-clad soldiers poured out. Claire turned to Eli. "Get to the truck." He hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll cover you." She fired another burst, ducking behind a concrete pillar. Sparks flew. The air was alive with heat and dust. "Now, Eli." He ran. She followed a second later, dodging gunfire, lungs burning. They dove into the truck, tires spinning as bullets struck the metal body. "Hold on," she yelled. The vehicle tore down the slope, bouncing over rocks and brush. Behind them, the tower exploded, an orange bloom lighting the sky. Eli glanced back wide-eyed. "Was that?" "Self-destruct," she said between breaths. "They wanted no trace left." "But the data's already out there." She nodded. "Too late for them now." They drove through the night again, battered and bleeding but alive. The stars above were scattered and sharp. For the first time, there was no pursuit, no sound behind them except the wind. When they finally stopped by an empty stretch of desert road, Eli turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. He leaned back, eyes closed. "We did it, didn't we?" Claire didn't answer at first. She just watched the horizon, black and infinite. "Yeah," she said finally, "we did." "Then why do you look like that?" "Because doing it doesn't undo what it cost." He nodded slowly, understanding. "You ever think it was worth it?" She looked at him, the corners of her eyes softening. "Not for me, but maybe for whoever reads it." He smiled faintly. "You talk like it's history already." "Because it is." They found an old cabin at the edge of nowhere, a roof, a well, and nothing else. Inside, Eli fell asleep instantly. Exhaustion, blood loss, and relief blending into something like peace. Claire sat awake by the window, watching the night fade. Her body hurt, but it wasn't the kind of pain she could fix with gauze. It was deeper, the ache of having survived something that changed her forever. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had once held a borrowed rifle and hit 100 targets straight. The same hands that had signed her life away to the truth. She whispered to the dark, "You don't aim to win, you aim to finish." And for the first time, that felt like enough. At dawn, she climbed a small ridge behind the cabin. The desert spread below her, endless and quiet. In the distance, a column of smoke rose faintly from where Signal Ridge had been. She imagined the headlines already circling the globe. The name Blackridge Systems. The leaked footage of soldiers blamming, equipment failure. The proof that none of it was an accident. And somewhere, maybe on a TV screen in a room full of bureaucrats, someone would whisper her name like a curse, and maybe like a prayer. Claire Daniels. The woman who didn't just hit her target. She erased the lie behind it. She breathed in the morning air, eyes glinting against the light. The wind moved across the desert like memory, soft, relentless, cleansing. And for the first time since it all began, Claire allowed herself to close her eyes without fear of what waited behind them. She was free now. Not safe, not healed. But free. The world could argue, twist, deny, rewrite. She didn't care. The truth didn't need her to defend it anymore. It would defend itself. And as she stood there, the first light of day washing over her scarred face, she whispered something so small the wind almost carried it away. Sometimes peace doesn't come when the war ends. It comes when you stop fighting yourself. She smiled at that. Because she finally had. The world didn't change overnight. Truth never does. It creeps slowly, stubbornly, through the cracks of the lies that tried to bury it. And in those first few days after the leak, the cracks spread faster than anyone expected. Satellite feeds flickered. Newsrooms exploded with data. The files Claire and Eli had released broke across the world like a rising tide. Blackridge Systems, ONI corruption, false reports. Evidence of deliberate algorithmic targeting tests that had cost hundreds of lives. It wasn't just scandal, it was betrayal written in code. Governments denied it, generals stammered on camera, analysts tried to spin it into a misunderstanding. But you can't unsee truth once it burns across every screen on Earth. And somewhere, in a quiet house on the edge of Lakewood, Claire Daniels watched it all unfold in silence. The same woman they once ignored now filled the world's headlines. But she didn't celebrate. She didn't speak. She just watched. Because the truth wasn't victory, it was consequence. She stayed off the grid for days. No calls, no emails, no news interviews. Her name was being used in every argument, every press panel, every protest. Some called her a traitor. Others called her a hero. She called herself tired. She spent the mornings fixing what she could: her mother's fence, the kitchen light, the old garden that had gone dry. She'd never been one for sitting still, but her body now ached like it was trying to remind her what still being alive felt like. One afternoon, as she stood outside trimming overgrown vines, a car pulled up. A black sedan, tinted windows. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. The door opened. A woman stepped out, uniform, sharp, calm, not a soldier, an official. "Ms. Daniels." Claire nodded slowly. The woman held up an envelope, classified notice, from the Department of Defense. Claire didn't reach for it. "If you're here to arrest me, do it. I'm done running." The woman hesitated, then said quietly, "Not arrest, not yet." She handed the envelope over. "You're being recognized under the Special Disclosure Statute. They're calling it an act of necessary defiance." Claire frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning you broke the law, but you broke it for the right reason." The woman's voice softened. "For what it's worth, some of us are grateful." Then she turned and left, the car disappearing down the street. Claire stood there for a long time, holding the envelope like it weighed more than it should. Inside was a single sheet. A letter, an official seal at the top. It read, "Your actions resulted in the exposure of one of the largest defense corruption cases in U.S. history. The record will reflect both the breach and the bravery. Your status, undisclosed contributor to internal reform proceedings." She almost laughed. Bureaucracy still found a way to make truth sound like a memo. Still, she folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside her medals. Not to remember the government. To remember that doing what's right often means standing alone. Days turned into weeks. Life began to hum again around her. Kids rode bikes down her street. The hardware store reopened. The air smelled of summer dust and fresh coffee. But the quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Sometimes at night, she'd sit by the window and stare at the stars. The same sky she used to aim through her scope, now just sky. And she'd think about Eli. About the way he smiled even when things were burning. About her uncle's voice when he said, "I tried." About all the good people who never got to tell their side of the story. She made a promise to them each night in her mind: they'll never erase you again. 3 months later, she returned to the range. It was part of the Marine Heritage Center, now clean, quiet, rebuilt. A small brass plaque marked the spot where her challenge had once made her infamous. A young recruit was sighting in a new rifle when she approached. He noticed her badge first. "Ma'am, you're..." "Just Claire," she said gently. He looked embarrassed. "Sorry, I read about you. You're kind of a legend." She smiled. "Legends are for dead people. I'm still fixing fences." He laughed nervously, then asked, "Is it true you hit every target at 100 meters first try?" She looked at the distance, the wind, the sun. "Yes," she said, "but that's not the part that mattered." He blinked. "It's not." She shook her head. "Anyone can hit what they see. The real work is learning to aim at what's hidden." He looked puzzled, but she smiled. He'd understand one day. As she left, she looked once more downrange, the targets glinting white under the morning sun, and felt something stir inside her chest. Not pride, just peace. The news moved on eventually. Other scandals, other names. The world always finds a new storm to chase. But the Blackridge story remained, an anchor in the digital ocean. Every time someone tried to bury it, it resurfaced. Truth does that. The government quietly restructured. Oversight committees expanded. A few high-ranking officers resigned for health reasons. And in some hidden basement in Washington, someone still kept a file marked Daniels, Claire, do not engage. But they wouldn't need to. She wasn't at war anymore. One morning she drove out to the desert again, not to run, to remember. She parked the old truck where the motel had once stood. The glass was gone, the sand covering most of it now. Time had swallowed everything except the feeling. She stood there for a long time, breathing in the same dry wind that had carried her through hell and back. She took off her hat, let the sun touch her face, and whispered, "We made it." No answer came, but in the stillness she could almost hear them. Eli's laugh, her uncle's voice, the echo of the bullet that had once started everything. The sound of closure. She picked up a small rock, flat and smooth, and placed it on the ground. No words, no flag, just a marker. Then she walked back to the truck, her steps unhurried, her heart strangely light. Months later, she started teaching part-time at the local community range. Not military drills, not combat. Patience, focus, responsibility. She never mentioned her past to the students. She didn't need to. They felt it in how she taught, in the calm precision, the insistence on breathing, the way she treated every missed shot not as failure but as a lesson in control. One afternoon, a young woman stayed behind after class. "Miss Claire," she asked softly, "why do you always say the target isn't the point?" Claire thought for a long moment, then said, "Because sometimes the thing you're aiming at isn't what you need to hit. It's what you learn while aiming that changes you." The girl nodded slowly, still not quite understanding, but she would one day. Claire smiled, watching her walk away into the sunlight. That was enough. At home, the world felt still again. No sirens, no orders, no lies chasing her shadow. Just quiet. She made a cup of coffee, stepped out onto her porch, and looked up at the evening sky. There were no medals on her walls, no framed newspaper covers, only one photo, her and her uncle at the training range, long before the secrets and the losses. They were laughing, the world still small and simple. She touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "We did what we could." For once, she didn't feel the need to add more. The air smelled of rain on dust. A gentle wind carried the faint hum of life, neighbors talking, distant traffic, the pulse of an ordinary world that had no idea what it owed to her silence. And she smiled, because that's how it should be. That night, she sat under the stars with her notebook. She wrote the same line over and over, like a promise she wanted to last beyond her own memory. Truth isn't loud, it doesn't demand, it endures. She closed the book, leaned back in her chair, and watched the constellations shift slowly overhead. The same stars she'd looked at during missions, through a rifle scope, through fear and exile, now simply lights in a quiet sky. No more running. No more pretending. Just being. She thought of all the people she'd lost, all the ones who'd believed she couldn't stand on her own, and she smiled softly to the wind. "I stood," she whispered, "and I stayed standing." The night didn't answer, it didn't need to. Because somewhere out there, across newsrooms and servers and whispers, her story was still traveling. The truth she fought for had become its own kind of signal, one that didn't fade. She closed her eyes and listened one last time. The sound of the wind, the pulse of her heartbeat, the quiet certainty that she had finally hit the only target that mattered. And when she spoke, it was barely more than breath, soft, steady, and unshaken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. A pause. The stars above her reflected faintly in her eyes. It simply acts. The night carried her words into silence. And in that silence, Claire Daniels was finally home. The end.